Number 10. Belchite. From 1936 to 1939, Spain was bitterly divided in a violent civil war between nationalist rebels and those loyal to the country's republican government. A small town in the nation's northeastern region, known as Belchite, found itself entangled among the conflict's front lines. In 1937, Belchite was under the control of the Nationalist Army when the Republicans seized it during a weeks-long siege. The battle left the town almost completely destroyed. Author Cecil D. Eby wrote that the destruction was so extensive that people couldn't even tell where the streets were. Horrified onlookers watched as bodies were pulled from beneath piles of mortar, bricks, and other debris. The stench was unbearable, and the scene was littered with mule carcasses and personal belongings, including sewing machines, cooking pots, and other everyday items. Belchite was retaken by the Nationalists yet again in 1938 under the command of General Francisco Franco, who later rose to power as a fascist dictator. Instead of razing the town's ruins, he left the site as a monument to the fallen. Residents continued to live there for another 15 years until a new village was built nearby. Today, the eerie yet fascinating ruins look much like they did when they were abandoned. They bear the hallmarks of brutal warfare, including bullet-riddled buildings, piles of rubble, and other damage left behind. Number 9. Hacienda del Cochero. On the outside, the Hacienda del Cochero in Guanajuato, Mexico is scenic and peaceful. Set against the backdrop of the serene surrounding mountains, the quiet gardens consist of stone paths surrounded by lush vegetation, intricate sculptures, and colorful flowers. Those who dare to venture beyond the entrance to a tunnel leading below ground level will discover something a lot less peaceful. Located beneath the ground is a horrifying torture museum. As visitors wind through its dark, dungeon-like passageways, they'll see various displays filled with disturbing devices like chastity belts, cages, and guillotines. The museum claims that indigenous captives were kept at the site during the forceful mission to convert people to Catholicism known as the Spanish Inquisition. Prisoners were tortured by the Spaniards in the underground rooms that now house the museum displays until they renounced their religious views and converted to Christianity. The subterranean chambers also functioned as holding cells for people who were accused of breaking even trivial laws. Number 8. The Land of Black Magic. Located in northeastern India, the isolated, centuries-old village of Myong has been passing down its legacy of witchcraft and wizardry for many generations. Legend holds that people in Myong have transformed into animals and that men have disappeared just by uttering the words Luki mantra. There's also an ancient tale claiming that during the village's early days, saying Udan mantra would enable someone to fly through the air and land beside their true love. Myong was supposedly founded when black magic practitioners sheltered in the woods. They were accused of using witchcraft to kill Muhammad Shah's army of 100,000 horsemen in 1337. It's also rumored that swords resembling the weapons that were used to perform human sacrifices during ancient times have been found buried in the village. Today, Myong retains its eerie vibes. Locals offer palm readings and fortune-telling sessions to the occasional traveler who passes through. There are still witch doctors and spiritual healers living there who offer their services with helping people find the answers they're looking for in their lives. The one thing their spells can't do is change the weather. Number 7. Via de Vecchi. In the village of Archangelos on the Greek island of Rhodes, there's a two-story home made of stone and wood that was intended to serve as dictator Benito Mussolini's summer home. He never made it to Via de Vecchi. His advisor, Count Cesare de Vecchi, ended up living there instead while governing the Dodecanese Islands, which Italy had seized from the Ottoman Empire in 1912. The islands were ceded to Greece in 1947, and Vecchi abandoned his villa after living in it for 11 years. Since then, it's remained completely deserted, and it's fallen further into decay over the years at the hands of time, nature, and vandals, who have covered the interior with graffiti. Some believe that the government let the mansion fall apart on purpose as a reminder of de Vecchi's cruel ways and the Dodecanese people's refusal to become Italianized. Via de Vecchi was listed for sale in 2014. It's unclear whether it sold, but it remains infamous to this day as one of Italy's most haunted houses. At the time it was put on the market, it was one of many properties that Greece was selling in an effort to repay loans it borrowed from the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the European Central Bank, ECB. Speaking to Bloomberg, Hellenic Republic Assets Development Fund HRADF Executive Director Andreas Taprantzis described Villa de Vecchi and other properties as long hidden and buried. He saw their sale as an opportunity to showcase forgotten historical and cultural sites to both Greeks and tourists. But it seems as though Villa de Vecchi is a place many people would rather forget. Number 6. Bokado Inferno. In English, Bokado Inferno means mouth of hell. It's the name of a scenic cliff formation and cave opening in the coastal town of Cascais, Portugal. The site is named after the way the Atlantic waves splash forcefully into the cave system. But its ominous name and the rough waters that crash into it are the least disturbing things about it. Bokado Inferno is infamously known as the place where magician and occultist Aleister Crowley faked his death in 1930. He commissioned the help of a poet named Fernando Pessoa, who passed his phony suicide note on to the press. The letter consisted of an array of symbols mixed with messy Portuguese, which Pessoa helped translate for the confused media. It supposedly said, "Can't live without you. The other mouth of hell that will catch me won't be as hot as yours." 3 weeks later, Crowley reappeared alive and well in Berlin at a gallery opening. In the end, he had only pretended to take his life, presumably as some type of twisted PR stunt. There's a plaque at the Bokado Inferno marking it as the place Crowley staged his death. Have you ever heard of Aleister Crowley? Tell us in the comments and hit subscribe while you're at it. Number 5. Grasshopper Chapel. Throughout the 19th century, the Midwest was occasionally plagued by Rocky Mountain locusts. During a particularly bad infestation in 1873 that sparked 4 consecutive years of locust plagues, the insects devoured crops, wood, fruit, and clothing. The locust swarms grew so large and powerful that locals were helpless to combat them. After a statewide day of prayer in Minnesota failed to resolve the problem in 1877, a priest in Stearns County named Father Leo Winter suggested petitioning the Virgin Mary for help. Parishioners set to work on a quaint hilltop chapel overlooking the city of Cold Spring. In the meantime, the locusts vanished. They were completely gone by the time the church was finished being built, and they didn't stick around long enough to lay eggs, so they didn't return the following year. Less than 3 decades later, the species went extinct. The original chapel was destroyed by a tornado in 1894, and a new one was built in 1952. It contains an altar, 4 stained glass windows, and a Virgin Mary statue that was removed from the first chapel. A relief of the Virgin with 2 grasshoppers marks the small church's entryway. Number 4. Kayakoi. Situated among Turkey's Taurus Mountains near the Mediterranean coastline, there's a village filled with neglected streets and decaying buildings. It only takes a few seconds of looking around to realize that nobody lives there. Originally called Karmilassos, the 18th century town was originally home to a Greek Orthodox population which grew to include as many as 20,000 residents by the early 20th century. From 1919 to 1922, the Greeks and Turks fought over land in what later became known as the Greco-Turkish War. Violence was often aimed at the Greek Orthodox communities in Turkish territory. People fled in droves, while a few stubborn and brave souls remained committed to staying. In the meantime, Turkish Muslims in Greece bore the brunt of the country's rivalry. In an effort to curb the bloodshed, the Greek and Turkish government started a population exchange in 1923. This meant that even though the residents of Kayakoi had been lucky enough to continue living peacefully among their Turkish neighbors, they had no choice but to leave and return to Greece. A refugee crisis ensued in both countries as authorities scrambled to arrange housing for the sudden influx of migrants. Kayakoi's 350 houses remained vacant. Resettled Turkish Muslims didn't want to live there because of the stories of death they had heard. Time has taken an immense toll on Kayakoi's buildings, which look much more ancient than they are and have an eerie beauty to them. They remain standing as a historical monument and a reminder of the forced relocation that upended hundreds of thousands of people's lives. Number 3. Chateau Miranda. Located in Belgium, the 19th century neo-Gothic castle Chateau Miranda was built starting in 1866. It was commissioned by the Liedekerk de Beaufort family, who had left their previous castle during the French Revolution nearly 70 years earlier. The massive home had over 100 rooms and construction took a long time. So long, in fact, that it was still being built when its designer, English architect Edward Milner, died in 1884. Chateau Miranda was finally finished in 1907 when its clock tower was erected. The original owner's descendants lived in the house until World War II, when it was taken over by the Nazis during the Battle of the Bulge. In 1950, the National Railway Company of Belgium took ownership of the castle and renamed it Chateau de Noisy. It functioned as an orphanage and a holiday camp for sickly children until the late 1970s. The site became too costly to maintain and was abandoned in 1991. That same year, a huge fire majorly destroyed parts of the castle. At the time, Chateau Miranda was still under the guardianship of the Liedekerk de Beaufort family, who refused to let the municipal government take over the property. Nobody else wanted to invest in it, and it soon became derelict. The ceilings collapsed, and vandals hastened the castle's decay. It remained popular among urban explorers, but became a major safety concern. With its structural integrity severely compromised by all the damage it had incurred over the years, Chateau Miranda was beyond saving. Demolition began in 2016, and it took about a year for the castle to come down entirely. Photographer Matthew Hampshire had the opportunity to snap some of the last known photos of the sprawling structure before it was razed to the ground. He memorialized the crumbling castle during its final moments, ensuring that it won't be forgotten, even though it no longer exists. Number 2. Lake Reschen Bell Tower. Nestled among the Italian Alps near the Austrian and Swiss borders, Lake Reschen is a man-made reservoir with a 14th-century steeple jutting out from the surface. Located in the province of South Tyrol, it's the only remaining visible remnant of the village that once stood in the valley before it was filled with water. Plans to create a reservoir for a hydroelectric plant date back to 1920, but originally called for a much smaller and more shallow body of water. That changed in 1939 when the chemical company Montecatini proposed connecting two natural bodies of water, which would require creating a much bigger lake than initially planned. Several villages would inevitably be flooded as part of the process. The project was repeatedly delayed due to World War II and resistance from locals who fought to save their villages from being submerged. But they ultimately lost that battle, and in 1950, water began to flow into Vinschgau Valley, drowning 163 homes and 1,290 acres of cultivated land. Before creating the lake, workers demolished the nave of the Church of St. Katharina and removed the bells from its steeple. Established in 1357, the historic house of worship once stood as a testament to the area's long and rich history. But the bell tower was left in place and still stands today as all that's left of the village. It's become somewhat of a tourist attraction, and authorities have even started to occasionally drain the lake to perform maintenance on the steeple and make sure it still stands. Even though there are no longer any bells in the tower, local legend claims that you can sometimes hear them ringing during the winter. Number 1. Chateau de Toho. Located in the Bay of Morlaix at the southern entrance to the English Channel is the Chateau de Toho. It was built starting in the 16th century as a fort to defend the bay from the English. Its construction followed the plunder of Morlaix in 1522 when English soldiers stormed the city disguised as merchants. Equipped with powerful cannons and surrounded by a 21-foot thick wall, Chateau de Toho gave the French a major advantage over any enemies that might enter the bay. In 1720, the fortress was converted into a prison. During the 19th century, French socialist and political activist Louis-Auguste Blanqui was relegated to the castle. In the 1930s, it became the home of a renowned journalist, novelist, and the widow of a wealthy seed merchant named Mélanie Lévesque de Villemorand. From 1960 to 1980, Chateau de Toho operated as a sailing school. Today, the castle has been restored and is open to the public for tours and as a vacation property, but is not accessible by foot. Thanks for watching. Would you like to visit any of these places? Tell us in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time for another amazing video right here on American Eye.